Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about understanding Dungeons and Dragons fantasy, Dungeon Masters and Dragon Masters, OSR game masters and players, and indie game masters and players, and how to think about them. All right, so let's dig into this. So I definitely have beef with OSR and indie fantasy tabletop role-playing game masters and players. Go right, go left, you'll hit some nonsense, game master commentary channel, and they'll tell you everybody can play what they want. What's it matter? Blah, blah, blah. You play what you want, I'll play what I want, and who cares? I care. Okay, the only people who believe that people can play what they want and should play what they want are pathetic losers who don't understand stakes. And let me explain this, all right? There are stakes, okay? We are the tabletop role-playing game sphere, okay? And we are losing. We are losing in first of all, tabletop RPG, right? We use that term, right? Because tabletop matters. And the reality is we are losing to platforms that we should not be losing to, okay? First of all, we are losing to the board game industry. It's bigger, broader, and more people engage with it than tabletop role-playing games. That should not be, right? And now we are actually defeating the war game sphere. The tabletop role-playing games are much larger than war gaming. That's good. We defeated them in 1974. We're still defeating them in 2024. But there's no reason in the world we should be losing, right, to, there's no reason in the world we should be losing to board games. In addition to this, tabletop role-playing games are losing to video games, which is pure and utter garbage. Video games are not art. They are not valuable. They are not good. Okay? Tabletop role-playing games will help you be a better reader. They will help you be a better person. Video games are useless tripe that are beating something that is 100 times better than them, right? And I want Dungeons and Dragons to defeat the video game industry. I do not want to give another inch to that garbage industry that does not deserve to be beating us, right? So from that perspective, if I want tabletop role-playing games to be bigger than board games, bigger than video games, we need everyone to be a dungeon master or a dragon master. Dungeon master, you know what that is. Dragon master, those are other channels call them Dungeons and Dragons players. Dungeon masters and dragon masters. We need everybody, right? So whatever you're doing on the OSR and the indie is a waste. The only people who will tell you that noise and sing that junk to you that you can play whatever you want are people who don't understand stakes and also don't mind losing because they are losers. I mind losing. I'm not a loser, right? And so anytime you hear somebody squawking on the internet telling you that you could play whatever you want, it's because they don't mind losing because they are a loser. This is wrong. We need to overtake board games and we need to overtake video games, which means no game masters, no players. Everybody needs to get on board. Okay? Now this is hyper true, in my humble opinion, if we're talking about fantasy role-playing games. So let's just keep the box of this discussion at that, okay? And what I want to talk to you about today is I want to talk to you about how we think about OSR game masters and players and how we think about indie game masters and players, right? Because one, I'm still on this journey, right? And right now, I really think of them in many ways as enemies, right? They're taking what I should have, right? They're taking the number one slot for tabletop, right? We have RPG. Dungeons & Dragons has fully defeated wargaming in every possible way. But we have not defeated board games, and we cannot defeat video games until we have defeated board games. So these OSR game masters and OSR players are taking from me what I deserve. And what do I deserve? I deserve for my favorite tabletop experience, Dungeons & Dragons, to be on top, to have defeated role-playing games and video games, right? So they're taking from me, and so I see them as enemies. However, I do know this is wrong, okay? How do I know this is wrong? Well, I just saw Kung Fu Panda 4. Zero spoilers for Kung Fu Panda 4 here. But I am going to talk about the film because it did help me understand OSR game masters and players and indie game masters and players. So first of all, let's talk about fantasy role-playing games from the perspective of Dungeons & Dragons, the premier tabletop experience, to OSR fantasy role-playing games and indie fantasy role-playing games. And I'm going to give you examples of all three. Dungeons & Dragons is exactly Dungeons & Dragons. What matters on Dungeons & Dragons? If you're some crusty grognard who's playing 1984 Dungeons & Dragons, you don't matter and you're not part of the community, in my humble opinion, okay? You're just some nostalgia, like vacuum. You're not really a Dungeons & Dragons player in my own, or you're not a Dragon Master or a Dungeon Master in my humble opinion. Dungeons & Dragons is Dungeons & Dragons today, right? If you're playing 2014 to current Dungeons & Dragons, you are actually a Dungeon Master. You are actually a Dragon Master. And you are playing 2014 and up Dungeons & Dragons. What carries Gary's legacy? Gary Gygax's legacy is always carried on the current version of Dungeons & Dragons. It's what has most hype. It's what matters. It's what gives legacy and momentum, right? Gary didn't want anybody blowing dust off of crusty old 40-year-old books and doing it in his name. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to be king of the tabletop. And he is king of the tabletop when you play D&D now, not D&D then, okay? All right. OSR. What is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game that is OSR? Shadow Dark. It's the biggest and the best OSR that is. Kelsey Dion came in, crushed it, defeated every single person who ever created an OSR game, and made $1.3 million. She is the queen of OSR, and she is the king of OSR because no king has ever surpassed her, right? So OSR, fantasy tabletop role-playing game, is Shadow Dark, okay? And Shadow Dark has game masters and it has players, okay? What is indie fantasy tabletop role-playing games? Well, the best of them out there right now is 13th Age. It's actually fantastic. I own it. It's pretty amazing. There are people, now, I just use the concepts and bring them over to a real thing, which is Dungeons & Dragons. But it was a good read and it had a lot of great ideas. And I used some of those ideas using page 4 of Dungeons & Dragons, which is the rules aren't in charge, you're in charge, right? And to be clear, good dungeon masters use the best from OSR and from indie, right? And have read all of them, right? Like, and have read OSR and indie, not all of OSR and not all of indie, but they have read, but they stay on top. And like, if there's a spike in either one of those industries, they check it out, right? Like, that's what I do, right? And that's what you should do too, right? But you don't run OSR or indie. You just take the ideas and put it right into your Dungeons & Dragons game where it matters, right? This is like, you know, when, good example of this is Amazon Prime had Avatar Last Airbender for like 5 years. Nobody watched it, right? Like, it went on Netflix where it belonged. Millions watched it, right? Good ideas belong on Dungeons & Dragons, not in OSR and indie games that never see the light of day, right? All right, not for the masses. Okay, so 13th Age is the best indie fantasy tabletop role-playing game, and it has 13th Age game masters and players. Are Shadow Dark game masters and players, are 13th Age game masters and players my enemy? I don't think so. I have a new understanding of this. So I went to see Kung Fu Panda 4, right? I saw it on opening night. And the reason I saw it on opening night is I have the Regal app, and it's fantastic. It really has transformed the way I see movies. So a month ago, I got center theater seats on opening night, because opening night is the way to see a movie, right? I went and I was shocked, right? I go, the movie starts up, Jack Black, it's, you know, everything's great, right? And a villain from one of the past films walks in, and half the theater began clapping. I was like, what? Like, it was just an old villain, right? But half the theater, began clapping. Throughout the entire movie, people were laughing. People were, gasping. They were reacting, right? They were the crowd They were there on opening night because they cared about this franchise. They cared about Jack Black, right? They cared about Aquafina. They cared about movies. They were there because this is the crowd, and the energy made the film better. When it was done, I couldn't believe the diversity, the size and diversity of the crowd. First of all, the place was packed. Second of all, the diversity, right? There were families there with their kids. I was there with no one, right? I'm just there because I love seeing fresh, cool movies on opening night, right? And then one thing that really surprised me, I think like an entire soccer team came, like just high school kids just came out of the movies. Their parents were nowhere to be seen. There's a group of like 10 high school, students. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like one or two of them drove. They came here on their own, right? And I was just stunned. I was stunned at youth being excited about movies, old people like me being excited about movies, families still excited about movies. But the point was, it was opening night crowd, okay? Now, here's where we explain it. Dungeons and Dragons is the opening night crowd. In tabletop role-playing games, you matter, you are enthusiastic, you are the cool one if you play Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is opening night crowd. Here for it, excited for it, right on the now, right on the new, not willing to wait for anybody's opinion, always on the cutting edge. What are OSR? Oh, actually, what are indie? Indie are the people who go next week if it got good reviews and they had heard good word of mouth, right? People who follow. They need to be permissioned to see it. They need to be permissioned by good reviews, or they need to be permissioned by others telling them it was good, right? They're not worthless. They add to the box office, but they're second, right? They matter less. They matter less. And you're not going to have a great experience with them. Who are the OSR? The OSR are the sad sacks who wait for it to plop out on a streamer. The most useless viewers of all. Not useless completely, just the most useless. The most useless, right? The ones who are just so far down the line, so removed from anything cool, so removed and lazy, and just take whatever plops in front of them, right? Not hunters, not cultural hunters, not cool hunters, right? Not experienced hunters, just people who feed on the carrion that drops in front of them. Dungeons and Dragons is opening night crowd. Indie are people who see it in the theaters once they've been permissioned. OSR are carrion eaters who take whatever who pick off of whatever is left of the corpse. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. I'm very eager to hear yours. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.